Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Success Series presented by Manulife on the power of investing in a diverse workforce, essential for business. My name is Ian McLean. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we do get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's virtual event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope that you will join us in fostering a positive environment here today that is a safe and welcoming space for all. We know that there is more that we can do, and we are committed to listening, learning, and growing as we go. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors and partners. So a special thank you today to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. Just before the session starts, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please do ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the session so that we can reduce any background noise. If you have any tech-related questions, please comment in the chat section, and a representative of our team will get back to you momentarily. If you have a question for today's speaker, they will be gathered throughout the session, and our speakers will do their best to answer as many questions as possible throughout the presentation or afterwards. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation. It will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I now have the privilege of introducing today's guests, Stacey Mitchell, Tim Fry, and Carl Cadogan. Stacey Mitchell has worked in several different roles within development services for over 25 years, the last 22 with KW Habilitation. She is currently the manager of community and employment supports, overseeing KW Career Compass and Leg Up. Developing community partnerships has been a foundation for her work in creating a diverse and inclusive workforce across Kitchener-Waterloo. Tim brings over 5 years of employment-related experience in recruitment, selection, and job development to his role as a job developer with the Links to Work program. As the co-chair of the Making Sense of Abilities Coalition, a unique local initiative highlighting the economic benefits of employing persons with disabilities and providing resources for employers to do so, Tim is a champion for the business case for hiring people with disabilities and the competitive advantage hiring diverse talent can give employers. He is passionate about enhancing the role work plays in individual mental health and wellness and ending the stigma associated with disability and mental health in the workplace. As a job developer with the Links to Work team, Tim supports qualified and motivated individuals who experience barriers to employment in their job search. He also connects with local employers to support them through the selection and hiring process and advise on retention strategies to move towards a barrier-free work environment. And moderating today's session is our good friend, Carl Cadogan. Carl is not only the, amongst the many things he does, he's certainly well known to us in the Chamber community as the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. But Carl has served on numerous boards and committees in addition to that, and task forces, including the Canadian Bankers Association, the Premier's Council on the Voluntary Sector, and the Provincial Work Group on Gaming, Museum London as well, Pillar Not-for-Profit Network, Eva's Place, and the United Ways of Greater Toronto and London. He has written and spoken extensively about diversity issues and has served as chair of the London Diversity and Race Relations Advisory Committee, the Metro Toronto Task Force on Race Relations and Policing, and many other similar focused organizations and activities. Carl has a special interest in coaching and mentoring youth development, the Black experience in Canada, and African political thought. In his professional work life, Carl was most recently the Chief Executive Officer of Reception House Waterloo Region, a settlement services organization. Carl's currently a consultant at the Livingston Group, a small consultancy working with Black and Indigenous organizations across the country. So thank you today to all of you for joining us, and I'll pass it over to you, Carl, for the Fireside Chat.
Thank you very much, Ian. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with Tim and Stacey, who bring many years of experience working in employment with folks with developmental issues. So what we want to do today is help people understand that this work and this client group are very critical to really how we in KW look at making sure that people are gainfully employed, people are accepted based on their skills and their abilities. And so I can't think of two better folks to talk about this than Stacey and Tim. Why don't I start with Stacey? Stacey, what are some myths about hiring people with disabilities?
Thanks, Carl. So I think it's important first to note that myths are really roadblocks for people with disabilities to have the ability for equality in employment. And a lot of those myths and misconceptions come from a lack of experience or interaction with people with disabilities. So I think open communication is really important, and people only know what they know. So we're going to look at some of these myths that Tim and I have heard through our own experience in our jobs, and hopefully these answer some of the misconceptions that some folks listening today might have heard as well. So the first one that I want to mention is hiring employees with disabilities increases workers' compensation insurance rates. And the fact is that insurance rates are based solely on the relative hazards of an organization and their organization's accident experience. Has nothing to do with whether workers have disabilities or not. Another myth that has come up is that or misconception is that people with disabilities are inspirational, they're courageous, and they're so brave to overcome their disability. People with disabilities carry on normal lives like you and I for the most part. They go to work, they pay their bills, they go grocery shopping. They're wanting to contribute to community. They're not to be raised on a pedestal because they have a job. Another one is people with disabilities are unable to meet performance standards, thus making them a bad employment risk. When in fact, in 1990, DuPont conducted a survey of 800 employees with disabilities and found that 90% rated average or better in job performance compared to 95% for employees without disabilities. So, you know, there's numbers and surveys and studies that can back those facts up. Tim, do you want to speak to a couple myths, and then I can maybe pop back on if you like.
Thanks, Stacey. Well, I think you've covered some of the main, myths and misconceptions that are pretty prevalent these days. But another kind of misconception that's related to business is that it's really expensive. The myth is that it's really expensive to accommodate people with disabilities, and that it's not worth the financial expense. But the stats show that most workers with disabilities require no special accommodations at all, and the cost for those who do is really minimal. So one study by the Job Accommodation Network has shown that 15% of most accommodations cost absolutely nothing, and the majority of accommodations for people with disabilities, about maybe 80%, the majority, are a one-time expense of less than $500 or so. So it makes it very financially viable to hire someone with a disability and provide an accommodation if needed. And another myth that Stacey touched on a little bit, I believe, is that employees with disabilities are more likely to have accidents, and that they're more likely to be unsafe. But the study that Stacy had mentioned earlier, the DuPont study, shows that in general, both groups of people who have disabilities and people who do not have similar rates of safety in the workplace. And another study has shown that, in fact, 97% of workers who have a disability will rate average or above average in terms of safety for the job.
Thank you, Tim. That's those points are very interesting. Before Stacy gets back to the myths, could you spoke about finances, and I think small businesses always think about sort of the financial implications. So, what are the financial benefits for hiring people with disabilities?
Right. Well, the disability market controls over like about 13 billion US dollars in annual disposable income. So of course, by hiring from a diverse population, it will ensure that your products and your services are aligned with the needs of this market. And by increasing your market share, you'll be able to increase profits by offering these types of products and services. Deloitte has shown that about 78% of businesses believe diversity and inclusion is a competitive advantage. Why is that? Maybe Stacy can give some of the stats.
Okay, so from that review that Tim spoke of, 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. Businesses are 3 times more likely to be high performing and have high performing teams. 6 times more innovative and agile, 2 times more likely to achieve or exceed financial targets. And other studies have shown that businesses who hire people with disabilities grow profits 3 times faster, and businesses who hire people with disabilities experience 72% increase in productivity.
Those are some very strong and compelling stats. I wonder if Stacy, if you have a couple more sort of examples of myths, because I think that, you know, usually the hesitancy of employers is because they've heard things, they're not sure what's true and what's not true. So are there a couple of other examples of myths that you think it's important to the folks who are listening and watching us?
Yeah, I've got 2 more. One is that employees with disabilities have a higher absentee rate than employees without disabilities. And again, referring to that DuPont study, it showed that employees with disabilities are not absent any more than employees without disabilities. In fact, according to the survey, 86% of employees who have a disability have average or above average attendance records. The other misconception or concern that's you know, I've experienced in conversations with businesses is, well, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I use the wrong terminology? And so those are parts of the conversations that we as job developers or employment specialists want to have with employers ahead of time, to talk about some of those fears and dispel some of those myths ahead of time before the person is actually working on site. So again, going back to that open communication and having honest discussions and recognizing that, again, people know what they know. So having limited interaction with people with disabilities creates a lot of fear. So if we can have open conversations and honest conversations and understand the value that people with disabilities can bring to the workplace, I think is kind of that real key.
Thank you, Stacy. We are right in the middle of this pandemic, and what we hear a lot, not only in KW but elsewhere, is that there's a real labor short. Employers are having a hard time finding people. So why is hiring people with disabilities an important strategy for recruitment in this time, not just now, but because now it's more acute and there's more discussion about labor shortage in our community? This is a very good time to look at this target group. Why would that be, Tim?
Well, yeah, as you said, there's a big labor shortage that's going on right now, and it's projected to possibly become even more acute. So the Conference Board of Canada shows that by 2025, there could be almost 364,000 vacancies just in Ontario alone. And Ontario is also losing out on about 24 billion in economic activity and 3 billion in provincial tax revenue because employers can't find the people to fill the roles that they have. People with disabilities have a wealth of skill and knowledge that's not being tapped into because they are not effectively engaged in the Canadian workforce. So for example, 22% of Canadians have a disability, which means about nearly 645,000 Canadians with disabilities who have the potential to work in an inclusive labor market are not currently working. So in Ontario, that represents about 15.4% of the population. So people with disabilities are ready, they're willing, they're able to fill the gap, but they're underemployed. So in Ontario, where the unemployment rate is almost double that for people, it's 13.7% for people with disabilities and 7% for people without. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's double for people with disabilities. And of course, in local terms, the KW in Cambridge unemployment rate last year this time was 8.6%, and in Guelph it was 6.8%. So and now it's down. KW in Cambridge is 6.5%, and Guelph is 5.2%. So there's a labor shortage there that makes it difficult. So tapping into this labor market would be a good way to increase the knowledge and skills within your workforce. The other challenge is, the shortage means that a lot of businesses now are in a continuous recruitment mode. They have to keep hiring, they have to keep putting their job ads out there, and that takes a lot of time and resources. So in effect, it's a job seekers market at the moment. What this means is that there is increased levels of absenteeism within the workforce, presenteeism as well, and ghosting, which I'm sure everyone kind of has an idea about, but a ghosting is often on the rise, where someone will accept a job position and then they won't show up on the first day of work, and that can be a real downer for employers. So people with disabilities, if you hire people with disabilities, some of the stats show that will help increase some of those issues. So for example, the Accenture study that I mentioned earlier shows that workers who have a disability are 5 times more likely to stay on the job than people who do not have a disability. So this impacts retention quite a bit. There's also research related to autism in the workforce, which holds true for the wider population with people with disabilities as well. And talking about reliability, 86% were rated by their employers as average or better on attendance than their colleagues. And individuals in the autistic community, and similar stats for people in other disability groups, are there for the long term. So turnover rate is found to be lowest 7% with 72% retention rate. So some of these stats that have been shown for people with disabilities can kind of help employers not only to find the right people with the right skills and increase market share, they can also help some of the staffing challenges that are happening right now with the job seekers market that we have.
Thank you. If I can follow up on one of the points you made, recruitment has always been a challenge for all employers. Is there specific ways organizations can make the recruitment and selection process more accessible to people with disabilities?
Absolutely. There's several perhaps specific things. So in the application process, for example, having multiple application methods is a really good way to have a more accessible process. So in person, online, in paper. A lot of times employers will say, oh, thanks for your resume. Please go online and apply online. And this can be a barrier to some people with disabilities. Also, reducing the information that's required on the application may also be useful in terms of opening up the hiring process. So making sure that that information that's required is only related to the role and is actually needed to make the selection decision. As well, considering wording of the job descriptions could also be useful. So, for example, there are some catch-all terms that are used on most all job descriptions, right? Good communicator, works well in a team, right? So what do these things actually mean? So for a good communication skills, do you need the ability to influence or gain consensus? Do you need the ability to present to large groups or people? Some of these more specific wording would help people with disabilities to understand what the job involves and then be able to make a decision if it relates to their skills or not. The example that I made with communication is specific to the neurodiverse community. So, for example, a lot of people with autism are able to do the job very well, but they're not able to discuss or describe how they do the job, which is all of an interview. An interview is all just talking about how you do the job. It's often not showing. So that's another opportunity to increase the inclusiveness of the interview process is by considering alternative interview methods. So a work trial or some other way that the candidate would be able to show their work ability as opposed to describe it would increase inclusiveness for that population. As well, providing more information about the interview and selection process is always helpful. And I think this might even pertain to people without disabilities. Often, thanks a lot and you'll be called if you're moving on to the next stage in the process is the response from a lot of employers. If there's more information about what the next stage is, what's required in the next stage, that can help people with disabilities to plan and prepare ahead of time. Well, it can help everyone to plan ahead and prepare ahead of time, but it's especially useful for people with disabilities.
Thank you, Tim. And Stacy, I think Tim has covered a lot of ground in his answer to that question about processes and accessibility. Do you have anything you want to add as part of your sort of experience and your 25 plus years of doing this work?
Absolutely. So Tim mentioned the online application, and we understand that a lot of businesses, that's the route that they're choosing now to get applicants to apply to their positions. If a job seeker is working with an employment support agency program, there's nowhere on those applications to indicate that they're working with a job developer or a support. And so having, whether you're working with an employment support program or not, having that job developer or employment specialist being able to email the business a heads up just to say, hey, I'm working with this job seeker, really interested, qualified candidate, wants to apply for your job. They've sent in the online application, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that we are working together and we can provide this resource to you and the job seeker. Sometimes it's quite beneficial because again, there's no any online application that I filled up, there's nowhere that indicates that that person might need support with the interview or support in completing the application itself. So just having that open mindset and an inclusive mindset.
Do you find that most employers are open to that kind of support?
With regards to the application piece?
Yes, application process, yes.
Yeah, our experience has been if we give a call first to have a conversation with the employer just to let them know that this is what we plan on doing. And if we can't get through, then a lot of the time doing that email it has been receptive and it has led to interviews with people that job seekers that we've been working with, because the business has been made aware ahead of time that, hey, we're going to flag this application and connect with this job developer to help assist with the interview.
And give me just one example of the kind of assistance that you provide to a candidate.
Oh, so right from start to finish, from the pre-employment to filling out the application, to doing interview prep, to assisting on site with the interview if the employer is open to that. We're not there to answer any questions, but sometimes to prompt or remind, well, do you remember that time, Tim, that you maybe did this task at this past place? Nerves are running wild during an interview. So just having some of those prompts and reminders is something that our job developers do during an interview. And then again, the onboarding piece, we're augmenting any training that's happening if the person has been successful in obtaining employment. We're doing any additional job coaching that might be required. We're an extension of the business's human resources. We're a service that's there for the job seeker and the business.
Good. Thank you.
And if I may, Stacy made a great point about interview nerves, right? And I'm sure everyone watching this recording or live has had an interview before, and if you have, you've probably had some interview nerves, and that can be a bit of a challenge for people with disabilities, because not only are they worried about the interview, but they're worried about whether or not their disability is going to play a factor in the decision-making process. So sometimes I've found that Stacy has said, if you're in an interview, sometimes it might prompt the person, but I've found a lot of times when I'm in interviews with people, my mouth is zipped, and all I am there for is like a warm presence. That sounds kind of weird, but I'm a warm presence in the room that is on that person's side, and sometimes that's all someone needs to be able to flourish in an interview situation.
Okay, thank you, Tim. The next question is for you, Tim. What are some specific strategies to increase retention for all employees and also increase inclusion of people with disabilities in your existing workforce? So a two-part question, and it's important for both the employer, and it's also important for the candidate.
Well, and I think both of the parts of the question fit together quite well, because if you are including or increasing inclusion of people with disabilities, or all people in the workforce, then that in and of itself will help to increase the retention of your employees. One of the things that I kind of failed to mention in a previous question, but I think it kind of applies here, is the kind of nature of the language that's used around inclusiveness. So a lot of organizations will have the AODA disclaimer on the bottom of their job applications, right? If you require an accommodation throughout the process, please contact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't feel that's enough. I mean, you need to have that on your job description, but something along the lines of, if there's anything you need to perform at the best of your ability, please let us know, is a lot easier for people to understand, and it makes it more of less of an issue to reach out and actually start that conversation. So having something like that at all stages of the interview, selection, and also on the job. So opportunities for employees to answer the question, is there anything that you need to perform at the best of your ability, in multiple ways can increase inclusiveness as well. Two main things that I think are really important are having an accommodation policy and an inclusivity policy, or an inclusion policy. And both of these must be top down. So it has to have buy-in from senior leadership, or things are it's not going to pick up. And it needs to be accessible to everyone. So multiple formats, multiple locations within the business, and very easily accessible. Some possible accommodations could include things like modified break policies, modified job duties, alternative supervision arrangements. So a lot of these things can be included in your accommodation policy, which is based on asking your employees, is there anything that you need from us to do the job to the best of your ability? I think that's all I have for the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe Stacy has some more info.
Yeah, I was going to ask Stacy if she has some comments to add to Tim's very full answer, but I know there's so much to deal with around this question.
Yeah, so just a couple other strategies to keep in mind. Maybe incorporating a mentoring program, pairing a new staff who may have a disability up with a current staff to kind of have that go-to person or that friendly face, if you will, if you're going to breaks or to team meetings and things like that. Pairing somebody up during the onboarding can be a really positive and inclusive way to onboard someone and be a part of the team. Some wellness offerings. So keeping all your employees fit, both mentally, physically, and financially. So that just is good business sense. If you're doing well away from work, you're going to do well at work. And then also communication. So something that we've really learned during the pandemic is the importance of good workplace communication. So if you're working remotely, what are you doing that is keeping your team engaged and keeping staff aware and knowing that they can connect with you? As workplaces are opening it up and you're going back in, having more regular team meetings in person, because we've all been disconnected for so long. Having informal conversations rather than formal sit down gatherings. Hey, Tim, come on in and have a seat at the lunch table and let's just chat about how your day's been. Things like that, just to keep communication open is a really great strategy for inclusion and retention for all employees.
So if I can ask a question, we're almost 2 years into this pandemic and a whole lot has changed in terms of work. Do you see this as an opportunity for people with disabilities, or do you see this as another sort of roadblock? Stacy first and maybe Tim after.
I think it's a little bit of column A and column B. I know for KW Career Compass, we have some amazing employers that not only continue to employ people with disabilities during the pandemic, but actually hired more employees during the pandemic because people wanted to work. There's been definitely some roadblocks with as far as the remote working piece, because if people don't have access to devices or reliable internet, or it's a lot harder to job coach someone in a remote position. You're not going to go into their home and job coach how to serve people over tech. So those were some issues, but I know for the manufacturing industry, continued to hire and needed people on site and needed to fill positions. Tim, your experience?
Yeah, I would pretty much echo what you're saying there too. I think it is a bit of column A and a bit of column B. I agree 100% that it's a benefit because people with disabilities want to work and they're there, ready and able and want to. I do also agree that there are some challenges with the remote aspect of work that work has changed into. And I think that could also be said for a lot of people without disabilities. Often people with disabilities have other compounded challenges. So if you're unemployed for quite a long time as a person with disability, your income is quite low. You may not have internet service or a reliable computer device in order to do interviews, things like that. And transportation as well. If you are unemployed for quite a while and you are unable to afford a car, then that also makes it a bit more of a challenge. And these aren't necessarily things that are specific only to people with disabilities, but I think it impacts people with disabilities in a more impactful way.
Yeah, I hear you. what are some local supports available to organizations looking to meet their diversity and inclusion goals, Tim?
Sure. So I'm going to kind of break it down into two different categories, and I believe that we'll send out this information as well in the follow-up. But there are some disability-specific employment services in the area. So, for example, the Canadian Coalition on Rehabilitation and Work, March of Dimes as well as one. The Canadian Hearing Society, which services people who have hearing challenges. Links to Work, which is the service that I'm involved with. And Links to Work is the employment service of the Canadian Mental Health Association, Waterloo, Wellington. We've got KW Career Compass, which is Stacey's organization. And you've got the Conestoga Career College as well. The Conestoga Career Connections, which is run by the John Howard Society. All of these employment service providers have specific expertise in disability and employment and can definitely help out local employers in that area. There's also other employment service providers that don't necessarily have specific disability experience or expertise, although there are a lot of people on their staff who have that experience as well. Providers like Agilic, the YMCA, Lutherwood, Second Chance in Guelph are all great organizations for finding employees, and a lot of the people on the books there, so to speak, would also perhaps fit into the category of people with disabilities. There is also some more generalized support for employers related to disability. And one of those organizations is called ODEN, or the Ontario Disability Employment Network. They have a great web page, and they offer various services to employers related to things like accommodation, disclosure, and that sort of information. So they have a great website, and also the Making Sense of Abilities Coalition that was spoken about earlier also has some great resources on our webpage for hiring people with disabilities. And from time to time, we also do things like webinars and other events that can provide information to the local community. And we're available for employers to connect with us if there's anything that they would need in that area. So hopefully we'll be able to send out the contact information for that later on as well.
I have a question in the chat before I get to another question, and I wondered if I can read it. Hello, I'm an openly autistic entrepreneur focused on neurodiverse employment and disability employment. So thank you for this talk. What are your thoughts about the case behind the approach that there is nothing requested in terms of workplace accommodations that does not have wider benefits for employees across the organization? This can be true for physical and invisible disability accommodations and neurodiversity.
So I'm just working with that double negative there for a sec to see if I understand. What I think I understand is, well, yeah, you know, I don't think that there are accommodations that are not useful for people without disabilities, and I think that all accommodation requests would in some way increase the environment within the organization for all people, not just people with disabilities. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it's a good point to bring up in that a lot of inclusion policies are also very good for people who aren't necessarily people with disabilities or people in a visible minority or people who need perhaps those accommodations. As a matter of fact, 95% of accommodation requests are made by people without disabilities.
Okay. Stacey, any thoughts?
Just to follow up on that stat that Tim just said, again, with the pandemic, a lot of people with disability, without disability, were needing accommodation, whether it was working from home, whether it was flex work schedule to accommodate kids learning at home, or shared cars, because now families can afford two vehicles, better chairs, all of that kind of stuff. There was accommodations requested across the board. And so yeah, it's not always about the person with the visible disability that's doing the requesting. It's across the board for employees.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about the narrative of the resume. The value of lived experience. Job seekers may have different work history and timelines. Stacy, can you speak to this?
Yeah, so when businesses receive resumes, you're looking at the education and experience that a person has. And sometimes a person with a disability may have big gaps on their resume. And that's not to be confused with lack of experience or lack of skill. There is a real benefit and a need to leverage that lived experience of people with disabilities. They're a lot of the time needing to adapt and think on their feet or on the spot, just as second nature. The resiliency skill of people with disability is huge. Problem solving, collaboration, system navigation, innovative strategies, creativity. The list goes on and on. The amount of experience that people with disabilities can bring to the workforce that doesn't necessarily fit what you would typically see on a resume is huge value.
And if I could add, Stacy had mentioned that I think what you said was it's not due to a lack of skill or ability. And I would also add it's not due to a lack of motivation in most all cases, because of some of the challenges that people with disabilities face in the employment market. They may not have a linear career history. That doesn't mean that they are unmotivated in their careers.
Thank you. I think that the Chamber has, most of their members are employers with less than 10 people, maybe 75%. And I think employers want to do the right thing. So company culture is important. What should you think about? What should business think about to ensure that inclusivity is a foundational part of the business? So you're speaking to a small business, a company that doesn't have an HR department. They want to do something. What should they be thinking about now? Stacy?
Yeah, so inclusion is intentional. And that, I think that's really key to remember, is that inclusion is intentional. And for every organization, it's going to be different. So I pulled a checklist from the Society of Human Resource Management that offered an inclusivity checklist that provides a really good place to start. So some things on that checklist include: make sure company leaders understand that inclusion is about ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, opinions are considered, and value to the team is evident. Train managers and hold them accountable to ensure that inclusivity is a core competency. Tim, I think I'd mentioned earlier, form an inclusion council with genuine influence and power. You want to value differences and create an environment where people can feel comfortable bringing their authentic selves to work. You want to identify the needs of underrepresented groups and give them the necessary supports and resources. You want to provide workers with a safe space to voice their concerns. And remember that daily interactions is the most telling sign of whether your company has an inclusive culture. So really walking that talk and making that inclusion intentional. Something that businesses are aware, people shop and want to deal with businesses where they see themselves. So you're going to increase your consumer base, your customer base, by employing and being inclusive and having that inclusive culture, because people see themselves in your business and will want to deal with your business and shop in your stores and that sort of thing, because they see themselves there or a family member there.
Good. Tim, do you have any points to add to this?
Well, maybe not Yes and no. I think some of the ways to do this, are things such as, making sure that education is provided on inclusion in the workplace that targets real acceptance. Another way to do this would be to ensure, as the individual with the question has pointed out, ensure that all employees, not just people with disabilities, are able to benefit from workplace accommodations and adjustments so that everyone can perform their best. And I think that the communication point that Stacy made is really important. Making it easy for anyone to voice their concerns or give their ideas, which means multiple formats and multiple ways of getting and receiving information. So, for example, having regular staff meetings where staff can discuss how workplace accommodations can help individual needs, but then also having a possible idea drop box for writing in case there are staff in the meeting that don't feel comfortable to speak up in a group setting. So just things like that are some specific ways to increase this.
And
Good.
If I can add to that too, Tim, Tim gave a really great list of organizations in the area that can help with these conversations. So we started off with myths and fears and misconceptions. So if companies, businesses aren't sure, or how do we get started, reaching out to one of these supports that are already in your community, having conversations and starting the conversation is key, and dispelling some of those myths. Let's address some of those fears. Let's work together to be diverse and inclusive.
When employers call you, Stacy, like, what do they do? What do they say? Like, how sort of making that first step is a big leap for a lot of employers. And so it's you talk about being intentional, and I think it's sometimes people need a bit of a push, or people need to feel that whatever concerns they have are going to be they're going to be thoughtful, and they're going to be accepted, and they're not going to feel that they're going to be dissed in some way because they don't know all that they don't know. So what would you say are, how does employers approach you, and how do you make them feel sort of better and come around to your way of thinking?
Sure. So at KW Pure Compass, we have a great team of job developers. And so when an employer calls and says, I'm thinking about hiring somebody with a disability, don't know where to start. Well, the first thing we do is we want to come in and learn about your business, because you're the expert about that. So we're going to come in and learn about the business. We're going to look at the position that you're looking to hire for and do a task analysis. So we're going to break it down, see what steps are involved, see what sort of qualifications and skills would be needed from a potential candidate. We're really going to have that open, honest conversation about what are some fears that you have, what are some things that have been stopping you in the past to start this conversation. And sometimes it's, what if it doesn't work out? What do I have to keep this person on staff forever? Well, no, like, we can help with exit strategies too. Like, people without disabilities aren't successful at every job that they apply to. So, that it's, we've heard every fear and every concern, and we work with employers to make sure that they're as comfortable in the process as well. And as I said earlier, we're an extension of your human resources. Whatever we can do to make this a win-win for both sides, and provide you a qualified candidate that we know is going to show up on time every time, do a good job. It's a partnership, and it's building that relationship, building that connection, so that it is win-win and successful for both. And if it doesn't work out, then we help with that exit strategy and possibly present another candidate or not. Like, it's having those open and honest conversations. But it starts with the employer giving us a call. Let's go in and learn about your business, find out what it is that you need. What are your pain points? Where are you needing some support, and how can we help fit that?
Great. Thank you. This has been really I've learned a lot, and I thank you both. I want to turn it back to Ian for the last 10 minutes of the session. Before I do that, do you have any last comments, Tim, that you want to say to follow up on what Stacey just said, or anything at all from your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I guess I got lots of thoughts, but I'll give two. What I heard Stacey say earlier is very important, and I really like that as kind of a slogan. Is inclusion is intentional, and just kind of going by the seat of your pants and saying, "Oh, I think this will work and it'll feel nice," may not be the best impact for your business, and more than likely not for the individuals with disabilities that are in your workforce. So I think the intentional aspect of inclusion is really important. And I think the other part to highlight is somewhere along the similar myth of people with disabilities are unique and frail, fragile snowflakes, or people with disabilities are superheroes and are able to deal with things that other people in the community can't. And I just wanted to highlight that people with disabilities are people with disabilities.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much, Stacey. Mr. Ian McLean, it's you're on ball. You're on base.
Well, thank you to you, Carl, and to Stacey and Tim for taking time out of your schedule. I guess fascinating conversation, and one that is increasingly more timely. It's probably always been the right thing to do, to be open to diversity, and I think those that should be probably the first reason to do it, but it's not the only reason. Certainly, as we look at the labor shortages across just about every sector you can imagine, we need to fully utilize everyone and all of their talents, regardless of their any challenges they may have, and we need to make those accommodations, because as I think you've heard from Tim and Stacey, in most cases it's pretty modest accommodations, but it's a reservoir and a pool of talent that has been we need to fully take advantage of. So thank you for today. I think it's great advice. We'll be making sure that this is available on this webinar is available on the Chamber website. Certainly we'll be sharing it, the link via our email and social media connections, so that every small business that didn't have a chance to watch this live will have the opportunity to do so moving forward. Listen, we'll leave it there. I want to thank Stacey, Tim, and Carl for joining us today. That does bring us to the end of the session. I want to once again thank our partners and sponsors. Without them, nothing would happen with the Chamber. So to our title sponsor of the series, Manulife, thank you. Our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. And finally, to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, we do host a new Business Success Series session every Wednesday. And next week, we will be joined by Kitchener Centre MP Mike Morris, a familiar face to us, but with a brand new job and a fascinating story as the newest member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre. So we'll be chatting about his journey on how he got to where he is today and what his approach is to the new job he has and the issue that drives him, which is obviously the environment. We're bumping up this session to the 12 p.m. time slot for this week only to accommodate Mike's schedule. So I hope you will see you then, and you can join us. For full details and to register, visit greaterkwchamber.com. Please do share this series with your friends and colleagues. Join us every Wednesday afternoon for another edition of the Business Success Series, because if it's Wednesday, it's the Business Success Series. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.